All right, we're back. Another Sunday, another episode of Lost. This time it's a very important episode, episode 4, Walkabout. Luke, we've been talking about it for 2 weeks now. This is finally the episode where we get some of the backstory of one Mr. John Locke, portrayed by Terry O'Quinn. This episode is so important that we had to be joined by the OG Lost aficionado himself, sort of semi the reason why he came up with the Talkin TV moniker, because of how he was inspired by this show. Mr. Chris Ivanko, the original founding member of Talkin TV, you're back. You're going to be hopping on for a couple of episodes throughout this run, but you specifically requested to be on this episode after you were unable to make the pilot. I just wanted you to break down real quick before we get started why this episode you wanted to hop on.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me back. Hello, Talkin TV family. I miss y'all, and I'm so glad to see that the show is thriving. And let's talk about Lost, I requested this episode, Dom, because I really do feel that it's kind of where the voice is really beginning to establish. John Locke is such an integral part of the show. And before I go any further, are we just assuming everyone's seen the series so we can
everybody
spoil
has
ahead?
seen the series.
No, I have not seen the series.
Oh, no, Luke is not.
Oh,
But
all right. So I'm glad I asked. So
I'm very
because of...
fresh to it.
Okay, good. That's awesome to have a newcomer's perspective. I actually can't wait to hear a lot of your opinions on what you've seen so far, Luke. But so I won't spoil anything, but we all obviously can tell that Terry O'Quinn's John Locke becomes such an integral part of the series. And this is the type of show where everything is very meticulously built off the foundation that you get. And so for this episode to be his episode, his backstory, flashback, whatever you want to call it, episode, it really does sort of speak to how we see him on the island over here to where he was before he got to the island. And the dichotomy is just so important with this character as we move through the season that it's not only an endearing story of someone like fighting despite their disability, it's just super important to where we'll go. And I don't want to spoil anything, so I'll hand it over to you, Dom. But at the heart of its show, finding the voice, some of the mysticism that peeks through at this episode, of course, that intense moment around the bonfire at the end, this is really where I think you start to get a little bit of the magic that is Lost in full swing.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with all of that. All right, all of that and more on today's episode of Talkin' Lost. Stay tuned. This is Walkabout. Fuck copyrights. I think that was just short enough in order to get us in under the required amount. All right, people, this is Talkin' Lost, episode 3. We're talking about Walkabout. Like I said, this is a very important episode. This is the John Locke solo episode. Locke, who's been built up for the last 2 weeks as being this very mysterious background character, but as we know, is going to be this integral character central to the series going forward. Chris, what's so interesting to me that I forgot as I was going back and rewatching some of these episodes is how little interaction Jack and Locke have in these first couple episodes, especially given how important their relationship becomes to the crux of the series going forward. But it's so interesting kind of like seeing the characters when we first initially meet them. Saeed is like the tech head. Sawyer's primarily an antagonist, really. Charlie and Hurley are still like kind of the funny supporting characters, but they're constantly hinting at, Charlie's, drug addiction, obviously in the background. I keep forgetting how much screen time Boone and Shannon get. Despite the fact that they're only around for the first couple of seasons. And it's kind of insane just like seeing some of these initial character dynamics that are still continuing to build up. Luke obviously has been experiencing them all for the first time. Luke, building off of last week's episode, what did you notice particularly about the character dynamics and how they're really starting to be like firmly established in this episode?
Yeah, it's really starting to have that who's hanging out with who likes who doesn't like who. Jack is still kind of floating on his own between people, I guess. But yeah, this was really more of the Locke episode, so the relationships I didn't really... I enjoyed the scene between... So I'm still learning the names. Dog owner man with...
Michael.
Yeah, with the daughter or wife of I don't know. Give me like another season.
It's a lot. It's a lot of characters. It's a lot.
Well, thankfully, Luke, you have 22 episodes in the first season alone.
25.
Oh, 25.
25
Okay,
that
yeah,
first
so you
season.
got a lot of time to spend. Let me just say one thing, Don, before we get into the
Yeah.
specifics of this episode, only because you graced upon the Boone and Shannon thing.
It's
To
so
this
funny.
day,
In
I
hindsight,
don't.
it's so funny.
So, Luke, I don't know if the cover image is different in your country than ours, but in ours, we have a picture of the Korean couple. Sun and Jin looking at each other in their eyes, and there's like their hair's wet, and it's like there's like a beautiful like ocean wave behind them,
Well, you know how Netflix
and
is.
uh,
It
and
appeals to your algorithm interests.
it it says everything that was wrong with Lost back in the day, and it says everything that is still for some reason wrong with the marketing 20 years after the show's been over. Like they always try to sell. It's so funny. They try to sell like this is like a dating drama show when there's so much more to it. I don't want to spoil it for Luke. So,
But I
but
mean,
it's just like it's hilarious that we're still doing this.
well,
We're
I mean,
still doing this in 2024, and okay,
I mean, we talked about it when, like, part of the show's initial conception is the fact that the guys literally was like, hey, what if we did Survivor, but, like, as an actual narrative, essentially? So that's kind of why you have, like, those, like, dating aspect influences, the whole, like, who's gonna get with who already is with who. And even though, like, Sun and Jin are background players essentially in this first season, in these first couple of episodes, it's again just so interesting, like now with the benefit of hindsight of seeing where these characters go, kind of seeing how they're being built up, how they're being established, how certain characters there's more emphasis on them. Like I said, Boone and Shannon are established as pretty important characters. First off, Michael and Walt are more so background characters in order to help like build up Locke's story a little bit more, so establish him as a mystery character. What's it called? Rose as well, honestly. Like, I forget that even though she's technically not a member of that initial 14 that's credited in the opening cast for season 1, Rose is still a crucially important character. And even though she remains a background character for the entire series, like, her arc is, especially as one that's covered in this episode too, is really one that's majorly important. I particularly love, like, the sit down that she has with Jack, and also really this episode being kind of low-key an important Jack episode too, where Jack is constantly being talked up as like, yeah, you're low-key kind of the leader, you know. And obviously once we get more into like the mystical elements going forward, you know, it really is kind of insane to me the genre shifts and swings the show pulls. And Chris, I'm telling you, man, it's gonna take a while before we get there, but I think we're already starting to see a turnaround on the negative reception to Lost's finale, because I'm already seeing a bunch of people posting online that like the Lost finale, you know, it's been 14 years since that aired. It was originally in 2010, and people are already being like, yeah, the Lost finale really not that bad, probably because we've been inundated with so many terrible, like actually terrible TV shows and TV finales recently. I know the Umbrella Academy finale left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, but with that being said, let's get into it. The man, the myth, the legend himself, John Locke, named after the very famous English philosopher, portrayed by Terry O'Quinn. He's again just been like this kind of quiet in the background character. You know, you saw him talking with Walt a little bit last episode about the backgammon and everything. Walt's already starting to form this attachment to him, which of course is driving Michael jealous, because Michael's whole point was, oh, he wanted to bond more with his son ultimately, and now this might get in the way, especially now that they're stuck on this random island with God only knows what sort of creatures. You know, the episode starts with wild boars raiding the
Sawyer
fuselage, and Sawyer. What's it called? And it's Sawyer just in general causing problems for everybody before he becomes the charming rogue that we know going forward. But the big thing that's established about Locke once we get into his flashbacks, and it's interesting too, I forgot that the episode doesn't reveal that he's paralyzed until the end. Like, you go the majority of that episode in the flashbacks and you don't see like any full body shots of him. So you hear him talking about going on the walkabout, you see him getting belittled by his manager, right? And you're like, what's going on? Why can't like something's not being told to us? And then you get that reveal at the end that he's paraplegic, which already is kind of setting us up that like, oh, this island, this is not like this is not just like any old island, you know, like there's something here, you know, like the noises, the creatures that are here, the mysterious noise. We haven't even gotten into the others yet, but there is something going on here.
The freaking White Walkers are here too. Others? Come on,
I mean, the other thing too is literally no. There's a reason why they had to change to the White Walkers. Like Martin very obviously knew what he was, or rather, Damon Lindelof very obviously knew what he was pulling aspiration from. But the biggest thing that's established here is that, Locke, who obviously, again, we've just been taking for granted the fact that he could walk as soon as he was on the island, but now we know why he's kind of been like having those moments to himself ultimately. It's the fact that somehow, some way, the crash on this island restored his ability to walk, which, obviously ties into the title Walkabout. But so, Luke, what were your thoughts when you first saw that reveal?
Well, I think I'm noticing a pattern with the show. I come in with maybe 5 questions. I get an answer to one of them, and I have 3 more questions in the next episode.
Get out of it. You
so
guys set that up because I'm a guest. This is
We
scripted.
absolutely did. We absolutely did. Totally.
so I'm just
No,
like,
I just.
now I have
I'm
new
sorry, Luke. Go
theories
ahead.
about what the hell. Now I have new theories about what the hell is happening. So, but that was quite like an impactful reveal. Like right at the end of the episode, a lot of TV episodes have like that last minute where all the big thing happens. That's what bumps the IMDb rating up. And yeah, that was very unexpected.
Mhm.
And then you see the toe wiggle. In the show notes, you said he's revealed to be paralyzed before the crash. I went back to see the first minute of the episode. Yes, he does wiggle his toes, but that didn't click for me then. And then yeah, so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting how narratively it all comes together with it, especially like brilliant edited. Like that's the thing that, again, I forgot how good. I'm gonna say this in every single episode throughout the first season of this recap. I forgot how good the storytelling is in each individual episode, where there is just no concern with the reason why this show struck hold is because there is no like concern or greater emphasis on like the overarching mysteries of the island. Not yet. This first season is really just about establishing these characters and their backstory. And it's funny, Chris, I was talking to Luke as well about how I've watched both of Lindelof's follow-up efforts that he did after Lost. I've watched all of Watchmen, obviously, which we reviewed, one of our first episodes that we did back in 2019. And I'm almost done with his sophomore show that he did. His first show that he did for HBO, The Leftovers, which might be one of the best TV shows I've ever seen. It's absolutely phenomenal. And it's amazing seeing the seeds for both of those shows in Lost. Both of his kind of obsession with fandom and what he brought into his relationship with J.J. Abrams as far as how he contributed, how they bonded over their relationship with Star Wars, but also the fact that he's essentially constructed this grand tragedy where all of these characters have got baggage that they're trying to move past from their past that we're slowly breaking down and getting into as we continue to spend more time with these characters throughout this first season and on the island, that this island ultimately is more of a metaphor for them moving on past their trauma, which is kind of, he was essentially able to do a much more truncated version in 3 seasons as opposed to 6 on HBO, as opposed to network, which kept forcing him to drag everything out and make things more plot focused, which is clearly what he is not focused on or interested in, because in The Leftovers, right, you have the Thanos snap situation where 2% of the world's population just disappear, and the show never bothers to explain why. And it doesn't have to, because that's not what the show is about ultimately. So that's kind of, again, sort of the, again, it's where we go back to Lost's greatest strength versus its greatest weakness, is the fact that ultimately everybody was so concerned about the island and the greater mystery of what it was. And they did try to give you some decent explanations near the end once we got into the later couple seasons, but ultimately that's not what the show was about. And it really never was what it was about. You know, obviously you have these grandstanding mythological character archetypes that a lot of the characters fall into, you know, like, you know, the leader, the fool, the handsome rogue, all of that, you know, the trickster. But at the end of the day, ultimately all these characters have trauma, have baggage, and this island is ultimately about them moving on past it. I think that's why the finale still does hit, and it's why people are having, you know, this 360 on it, because they're realizing, oh no, this show did accomplish exactly what it was. People just weren't ready for it ultimately. And this is why I go back to that Lost is probably the most important, not only the most important network show, but the most important show of the late 2000s in terms of handling the transition line between the cable era, the HBO boom that dominated the early 2000s, and the streaming wars, the streaming era that would eventually lead into the streaming wars that would dominate the 2010s and the early 2020s. But Lost is like kind of the perfect connector between those two eras of television. And
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. Now, I'm like, we just came off of years of procedurals where episode starts off and 2 cops go out and they have to get the bad guy, and at the end of it, they catch the bad guy, or your classic 20-minute.
Yeah, but that's network TV though. That's network TV. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like cable TV, your Sopranos, your Wires, like the boom that was taking over TV in the early 2000s, where networks, you're right, were struggling because all they had was procedurals. But then come 2005. Lost is already on its second season. You also had House and Grey's Anatomy that premiered the same year, which again, say what you will about the quality of those shows. Those shows dominated the networks at the time. And you also had the sitcom boom, The Office, How I Met Your Mother, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Well, this show
Arrested Development is 2 years
predates
earlier.
this show predates those shows by a little bit.
Not
And what
by
I was
much.
going to say was
Not by much.
this show's at
only
the
a
turn
year.
of the century. But it's like 2004. It's like pretty early on. But what I'll say is what I was trying to say is that this show did what those some of those shows that you're talking about on HBO and whatnot did, but with the sci-fi element to a mass audience. And so that's why I think it was always in a fantastic position, because it was continued narratives week to week, like Sopranos, like other shows were doing, but with this kind of like supernatural twist now. And I think that's also where it ran into issues, is that those stories sometimes have a little more nuance. There's a little more depth. It's sometimes harder to get them all out in one clear sentence. And then this is, TV's always TV. You have the quotas by Hollywood. You have to have this sort of love interest, this love triangle, this many episodes. There's all these stipulations.
Right.
But when you're trying to do something original and innovative within those situations, that's where I think people failed to see just how hard of a go these creators did with Lost. Like, they were really in a mold and just trying to break through it so hard, and they did. But they had a lot of combating to do along the way.
Agree.
So I think that that's also kind of, you're talking about the finale a lot and whatnot, and it's just like, think about when the odds have been stacked against you and you have to still get something done. It's hard to do. And the fact that they did it, and Luke, I'm trying not to say specifics to not ruin it for Luke's experience, but I will say that I think that this show is uniquely different than like your Sopranos or other shows that were also breaking the mold at the time, because of this supernatural element that was just far greater on a scale than I think anyone had tried to do or think about in the TV mold prior to that.
Yeah.
And so that's where I also give it a lot of credit, and I'll be honest, a lot of, points that I don't necessarily give other shows of the same era that make mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly why it's such an important show to me. But just to dive back into this episode, there are so many great moments with Locke. Don't tell me what I can't do is one of the quotes. If you're a Lost fan, you say that all the time, no matter where you are or when what a situation rises, you'll think of good old John Locke saying that. And I think like a lot of why that quote matters, and so many of the things that he goes on to do matter, are from this episode. He, even though he is disabled and is dealing with the loss of his legs and self-esteem and confidence, as we'll later go on to find, and we see some of that in this episode, he's bullied and he has a bunch of personal issues that continue to grow as the series goes on, that we learn about. He doesn't give up. And I think that's a big part of this dichotomy of the show, which is there's two really schools of thought. There's the faith and then there's the science, right? And it really depends on where you want your funnel to lead you as the show goes on. But like John Locke being on the faith side, he can't explain necessarily why this happened to him with his feet coming back at the end, but he's taking full control of the moment. And so even though Jack comes off as like the leader type character, he knows how to walk the walk and talk the talk, John Locke kind of is there to propose a different side of leadership, which is, I think, threatening to Jack. And I think you can kind of see the seed planted for so much of what the show grows on in this episode too, as far as like the moral quandary that takes place between our characters. And Luke, you'll definitely see this. And so this is also not only just from being a brilliant episode regarding like specific plot points and moments, like the toe wiggle and other like hilarious little tidbits that he deals with in his journey to go on the walkabout. It's like it really sets the stage for the moral dichotomy that will take place. Do you have faith or do you believe in what you can only see in front of you? And that's another reason why I wanted to be on this episode.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more with any of those points. Like you said, the conflict that he has with Jack going forward, the whole dichotomy of the show that's really established in season 2, man of science versus man of faith, the idea of, seeing what it is that you can see in front of you versus seeing what you believe, and the fact that, again, one of the other points that people forget is Locke sees the smoke monster, you know, the man, ultimately that becomes a man in black. And the crazy thing that I forgot about this episode too is that Jack sees him too. You know, we just don't realize it yet in the quick background, you know, the one dude that he sees.
Also,
Yeah,
as a Risk
so
fan, I kind of had to be on this episode, but you know.
yeah, that's true. I forgot that they were playing Risk in that background as well. Now I know why you had us play so many episodes of Risk. But yeah, for me, like the most poignant and central moment for this episode is obviously the moment where Locke is revealed to be paralyzed, and obviously, unfortunately, knowing how that happens, but also again, kind of how that establishes and, you know, basically is his entire character's motivation. The fact that he is a man who defies expectations. He is a man who does not let the world try to get him down and does not play by the rules ultimately. And you know, it shows that, like, he's also a guy who's looking for connection in some way, as he's established with his many conversations with Helen. And obviously, once you see what happens with Katie Seagal's character, you know, as we get further into him going forward, you know? So, yeah, it's a really great character backstory. It's a really great character introduction. It's not one that you see coming either, which I really, really enjoy. Luke, your overall thoughts on this episode and just on the backstory on Locke that we got?
Yeah, I think maybe outside of the pilot, probably this was the most intriguing episode. Just yeah, seeing what Locke is about. That big reveal, of course, what you mentioned. Are we gonna find out more about him? How
Oh,
he?
we're gonna find out more about him.
Okay, well that's good. I'm looking forward to that. Then
Yes. Any other questions about any of the big overhanging mysteries so far that have
well,
been set up?
now there's just some guy in a suit on the beach, which is like, what is that about? That's another some Stephen King looking type thing. The smoke monster, it keeps edging us. Like
Yep.
we get the POV of it even. But yeah, now I think they're in purgatory or something. That's my
Oh,
latest theory.
the infamous purgatory
I,
theory.
I,
Oh, the amount of
I'm sure
times
that's
we've
a very
heard that.
common theory.
Oh, the amount of times that we've heard that.
I,
I've lost track.
I will say though, Luke, you bring up two really interesting perspectives there from a newcomer, and it's the Stephen King-ism. I never thought about it like that, but that's again what I was saying earlier to my point of why the show had the deck stacked against it and why I give it so much credit. It's really trying to do so much. There's even some horror, like you said, some kind of like supernatural elements that you just wouldn't expect from a show that's mainstream marketed as a dating show with nice looking people on a beach that crash in a plane, you know? And Luke, the POV of the smoke monster, I don't know how you felt about that, but like I think subconsciously that is a moment in my life where I thought, wow, there's creativity in cameras. Like I was always a musician from a little kid, but then I saw that and I was like, cameras are very creative too, you know? Like my little kid brain was like, this is like an actual foundational moment in my artistic journey, like seeing this sort of homage to, oh gosh, what's the horror movie, that Evil Dead, and the way like those cameras kind of move around the cottage in that first movie, right? Those very like menacing, fast, scary kind of like, you know, tracking POV shots. The smoke monster's doing the same thing, and it really resonated with me. How are those supernatural elements like working for you, Luke? Like, how is like all the different themes that they're playing in working for you as a newcomer?
I'm not great with latching on to themes. I'm very surface level viewer. But I just don't know how supernatural this show is gonna get. Like in the beginning, there was that monster looking thing that they say it's a boar, but there was something in there that did not look like a boar to me. Uh, the smoke monster, I already told them. I think it's something mechanical. Now you say it's the guy in the suit. I don't know what to think. We just keep watching, and
Yeah. Well,
I really
and the
want
reason
to.
why I brought that up is because the noises that they used in order to portray the smoke monster before we actually see it in any sort of physical form, that '04 CG budget that ABC had at its disposal, they used mechanical noises, so it kind of throws you off as far as what the monster actually is.
Gotta love that '04 CG
Oh,
budget.
it's so good. It's so nostalgic.
Can we also talk about, you know, John Locke's phone call?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, it's sad, but it's it's important, you know, like that is a real important part of who he is. I mean, he does kind of come off as the jack of all trades, the hero of every situation, which I think drives Jack to an innate jealousy just based on who Jack is, because Jack also overcomes a lot in his life, as you'll see, Luke, and has to deal with somewhat of a stacked deck against him as well. But I think it just frustrates Jack to see how this guy can always kind of have it figured out, which I think John appears to as the to the Islanders. He kind of appears as this guy who's always got like the answer to the situation. He's very crafty, very handy. He is good with all of the survival things that they clearly need in those moments. But then you have like that phone call, and you're like, there's always more to a person than you might
It meets the eye.
than meets the eye. I was not trying to do it, but I guess it's only
I was.
And I just think it's kind of like not only important to think about how all of these different characters, like you said, Dom, with all their different baggage, not talking about the suitcases that they brought on the plane, their actual real life baggage come together. Even the ones that seem to have it more figured out than others clearly have some issues. And that was a very, I thought, interesting way to show, like when she's like, this is going to cost you extra time or something, right? I was just like, wow, that was very well done. And at first I thought here he was on the phone with the lady. He was on the phone with the lady,
Yeah,
but
he was.
he seems pathetic at this point in time, and it's so different than who you've seen on the island, and the way that they just like flip so many times in this episode. You talk about the toe tap at the end, but that was another little flip. And I think it's just so genius how they're able to, watching it again, I was just thinking to myself, wow, this is really well done. It's like kind of like a mid-episode psych out flip, character shift.
Yeah.
It just keeps you interested.
Yes, it does. Walkabout, one of the most important, one of the most crucial episodes of Lost for this first initial run. Like I said, these aren't going to be long episodes going forward, but I think we covered pretty much everything.
And I just wanted to say one more thing if we're getting to the end here.
Yeah.
Because there's an important moment with Jack when he goes over to Rose and he has that conversation, and she's sad about Bernard and she gives him some advice. I feel like Jack seems like a character that you don't want to take advice, or he doesn't want to take advice, and that you don't think will listen to people. But I just think he has a lot on his plate. And I think as he grows as a leader in these first 4 episodes, he has so much pressure on him. He's the doctor. He's the hero. He's the savior. And I think a part of his reaction to all of that is justified. He has a lot of pressure, and he's just thinking in the moment, it's solve the next problem. And I feel like Rose, he does respect his elders. It shows a different side of him, that he is able to listen and he is able to take advice. And I just think it's really interesting how she's kind of like a side ensemble character, but her value is still so important. She's still impacting the decisions of the main character. We'll see if he takes her advice and runs with it, or if he just completely throws it off to the side. But in that moment, she's at least able to break through to him from what seems like a very stubborn, spearheaded, and also very forward-thinking, precise leader. Even he has a counsel in Rose, if you will, that he can go to run stuff by and to try and keep the ship afloat, if you will, stop things from sinking.
Yes.
And so it's just like,
stop the island from moving, if you will.
Right. Stop everything on the island from moving. And I just think it's like,
oh, come on, Dom. You're just giving me ideas.
And so I just think,
I have to sprinkle in the seeds,
my reason for bringing that part up really is pay attention to everything. As Luke, a new watcher, and all the fans watching along, and the great Talkin TV community, like if you're just revisiting the show, just like really just put your phone down when you watch the show. Do what you act as if you were in 2004. Treat your life with limited distractions when you watch this, because every little action has a reaction. Luke, whether or not it gets an answer, you'll find out, but every action has a reaction, which I think is very, very awesome, considering there's so many characters and it's such a large story to tell.
100%.
And this was a great episode. I don't know if we're wrapping up now, but I'm really glad I got to chat Lost with you guys.
100%. Yeah, no, I couldn't have asked for a better explanation. I really couldn't have. Like I said, whenever we bring Chris on, if there's one thing that I know that Chris always knows his shit on, it's Lost. So I'm sad that you can't be on for every episode, because let's just face it, that would just make my life a lot easier. But we were happy to have you on for this episode, dude. It really means the world that you're still able to hop on occasionally with us. So with that being said, Chris, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Yeah, I actually been posting on my own YouTube channel these days a little music, a little guitar playing and singing. Christian Ivanko. I'd appreciate it if you checked me out there. And just want to thank the great Talkin' TV community for being amazing. And it's a pleasure to talk with both of you guys again. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Luke, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Although my main residence is on the Talking TV channel lately, you can find my YouTube channel, look reviews. There's a bit of a back catalog there for you to enjoy.
All right, that was it. Sorry, I keep forgetting that like you don't promote your Instagram, but follow that as well.
There's nothing there.
Not yet. Anyways, oh man, you guys, we'll be back next week for episode Talking Lost, episode 4, episode 5 of the show overall. That being White Rabbit. That'll be next week, and then the following week we'll be wrapping up September with House of the Rising Sun as well. So stay tuned for all of that and so much more. Like I said, we're going to be recapping the show every single weekend for the rest of 2024. You guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talkin' TV Podcast across all platforms. This episode is available on YouTube and Twitch. Be sure this episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. Or in this case, watch more Lost. We'll see you guys next time.